Hello, welcome to my channel, That Mishlei Guy, where every single day we open our Bible to the book of Proverbs. Except that's not what we're going to do today. I've been kind of teasing it for a little while that I was going to do some of these explainer type videos, because doing the Proverbs, we keep coming across certain concepts that I don't do it justice if I try to explain it in full during the actual delivery of the proverb itself. And I think it makes some of the videos unnecessarily long. I'd like to have just a reference video that, like, hey, we can talk about this more on this video, and have it pop up as like a little highlight within the video instead of, talking about it too much within the individual proverbs. So we're going to do some about the metaphors for the body parts used in the human anatomy and what they actually represent in the proverbs, such as the architecture of the heart and the soul. But this one is actually going to be about the constellation of wisdom, as there's roughly 11 terms that get used over and over throughout the Proverbs, and they all kind of act as like feeders into this whole larger concept of wisdom. And so what we're going to do is, it's probably going to take me 3 videos to do it, but we're going to define each of these terms and explain their applications and the realms that they're responsible for. But as a person is developing wisdom, they're going to need to develop each one of these, not necessarily separately, kind of simultaneously, so that they all feed into the wisdom. And this is how somebody becomes a wise person, what is known as a hoham. And the hoham, this is a midway point on to becoming what we actually want to become, which is a tzaddik, a righteous man. But by definition, a tzaddik will be wise and righteous. So the intellectual development portion of the puzzle is wisdom, but the moral development is righteousness, and the tzaddik will have both. So as I got into the Proverbs, one of the things that struck me very early on was certain things that you'd see in the Old Testament would get translated as mind. And the most glaring one was the Shema prayer. Is in some translations it would say, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. But then other translations would say, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might, or all your strength. And this was always confusing. So you go back to the original Hebrew, and that word that will be used there is oz, and it means power. And I was kind of baffled. So where do these translations that use the word mind get this term? Or like, why would they use this term? And then you discover, looking through the Hebrew language, that there is no term for mind. This is not a concept that they have. So the Old Testament, the Tanakh, was written, over a period that predated Western civilization, like Greek culture, by more than like 600-700 years. So they had already mapped out most of the Old Testament in these writings before Greek philosophy even began. And that's really where the idea that there is such a thing as the mind, the logos, which is where we get the term logic, philosophy, Western thought locates that all the reasoning that a human being has is inside their head. It's in their brain. And of course, modern science would now confirm that is the locus of where thought actually develops. And so this Western civilization, their response to understanding this was to develop concepts of reason and rationality, and that they kind of saw feelings as these things to be overcome, and that with enough intellectual and mental development, a person could become an objective thinker. And most of Western philosophy is going to appeal to the concept of objective truth, and that the mind can be trained to have it. Well, Hebrew wisdom culture, which predates it, that says that's not actually how people make decisions. It's not with their mind. And when you look at the way that people interact with each other, you can see this, because you can prove something is wrong to someone and people still don't change their mind. You can prove something is completely true and they still won't adopt it. So what is this that prevents human beings from accepting truth or, modifying their behavior in light of truth and insisting on things that are incorrect. And the reason why is that a different internal filter is actually used when someone adopts truth, or how they form and see truth. And so the Hebrew wisdom culture was very aware of this fact that, yes, thoughts are great, but at the end of the day, at best, they perform an advisory role. They don't actually make the decision. Something else inside the body is doing this. And the Hebrew wisdom culture says that no, it accepts people are not rational. They are not reasonable. You can explain things to them, but they are either receptive or unreceptive. And it's this inclination toward or against a concept. It's not located in the head. It's somewhere else. The thoughts occur there, and they understand this, but the thought itself is not the decision maker. So what ended up developing early on in this Hebrew wisdom culture is the idea that when they would do an autopsy of the body, they were trying to get down to how does everything work. And they found this one organ right in the center of the chest where there was a network of wires going out to everything, and these wires would come in from everything. We would call them, veins and arteries, and this organ is the heart. And so what they did is they concluded that this heart, because it's connected to every part of the body, it has to be the most important thing. This has to be who we are, and it's inside of here. This is the idea that this heart is like the central command center. It's the headquarters. So this must actually be where decisions are made, is in the heart. And so whereas Western civilization developed the idea that there's a mind, Hebrew wisdom culture says no, there's this thing called the lev, the heart, and it's the internal governor. It's the one who actually makes all the decisions. This is where all opinions are formed, and this is where all the attitudes that a person is going to have are taken. And this primacy of the heart is why the thoughts hold no power of their own. The whole purpose of the thoughts is to be organized and coalesced so that a decision or an understanding can be made with them. And that, from the Hebrew standpoint, is assembled inside of the heart. And so then your first question is, well, then if we have all these thoughts and we have this brain, like, why do we have so many of them if that's not the one who actually, wouldn't it make more sense if the brain was where all the decisions were made? And it's a very interesting concept, and it's at the heart of Judaism. And because of that, when you read your Old Testament, this is what Christian thought is built off of, this idea as well. So when you're reading this Bible, and it's always talking about the heart this, the heart that, Jesus touches the heart, God examines and weighs the heart. This is what he's talking about, is your actual faculties by which you make decisions. And you've got three primary things that feed into how you will make decision through this heart. Is number one, the heart has to change. It has to become receptive to God, to receive that which comes from God. When it's in an unreceptive state, what we would call like a hardened state, doesn't want to listen to God. It doesn't have the Holy Spirit. It's not going to discern spiritual matters. It's going to box and block all that out. The second thing that feeds into the heart is God's holy word, the scripture itself. When we study the Bible, this is one of the things that informs the heart so that it can make these kind of decisions. But, again, a heart that's hardened to God is probably not going to read his book either. And so that leads us to the last thing that feeds into the heart. And that's this idea that we have wisdom, this internal thing. This is where our mind is constantly feeding our heart so that it can make these decisions, is wisdom. And I always like to think of it and look at it as sort of like this constellation where you've got these 10 intersecting realms and categories that all sort of just feed into this broad idea of the wisdom itself. But because the wisdom is not the executive, he's the advisor. I kind of think of it like the way that the presidency of the United States works, where you have all these different departments. You've got the Department of State, the Department of Treasury, the Department of Defense, and all these different departments that they all sit down and meet together with the Chief of Staff, and then the Chief of Staff gives the President his daily briefing that's going to let him know the state of everything going on right now. And so wisdom, in this analogy, he's the Chief of Staff. He's meeting with these cabinet heads, these secretaries, and he's coalescing all this information, but then he's providing something that's then actionable, and that is just like there's where they sit down and meet with the National Security Council. There's an internal chain of communication that happens between the brain and the heart, where from the Hebrew perspective, this would say that wisdom informs the heart, and it plays an extremely vital role. But at the end of the day, the Chief of Staff is not the President. The President is the President. All the Chief of Staff does is advise him. And because of that, we have this interesting difficulty where wisdom is very vital to us. It's one of the most important things that we have. It's one of the greatest gifts that we can have. It's one of the most important things we can develop. But it's also limited, and it's, at the end of the day, it's not to be relied upon. And the main reason why is, no matter how well developed the wisdom is, it can't know everything. God is infinite. This planet is his whole creation has just, it has no boundaries. And for us, our own understanding, our own wisdom will always have a limit. There will be a natural boundary. There's no way to know enough. Whereas God, is completely omniscient. The other thing with wisdom is it's never completely absolute. It cannot predict every outcome. At best, all that wisdom can do is establish what the tendencies are. They can recognize patterns and establish them and basically give guidance, but not a guarantee. So at best, wisdom is just going to tell you what tends to be true, and it will not always be true. So while wisdom can be developed, it's still a gift, and it can be removed, and it still requires revelation. No matter how much you study, God has the ability to shroud things in mystery. If he decides that he's not going to let anyone know, he can make it completely inaccessible. So wisdom, for that reason, is a tool, and a tool only. It is not to be relied upon. The other limit of wisdom is that it has to be morally shaped, or it will be used for corruption. It's, if you know how everything works and you're an evil person, well, then all of a sudden you can manipulate things to start doing harm to other people and to make everything work for you. And so this is where this Jewish idea, the Hebrew concept of Yirat Hashem, the fear of God, this reverence that you have for God, would understand, even though you've got this capacity to do these things with your wisdom, you know not to do it, because God has the ability to punish you and to remove your wisdom from you. So the wisdom in the mind is not the accountable agent. All it does is provide the information. The heart is what makes the decision. And more than anything, the heart is the thing that's actually in relationship with God. And it has the responsibility of directing the soul. And we'll get into that. The soul it's a two-part component of the spirit and the body. And this is the heart's primary purpose, is to sort of be the parent, the guide of this. And being in contact with God is how it's going to do it. But the heart is the one that deals with God. The wisdom is the one that deals with the heart. And for these very reasons, wisdom can never be the primary focus. God, in fact, emphatically tells us again and again and again all over the Bible, do not rely upon it. While it's the greatest gift he can give and the most useful thing, at the end of the day, he still says that, our thoughts are not his thoughts, that his ways are not our ways, and that the earth is closer to heaven than our mind is to his. There's nothing we can do with our mind that is ever going to impress God. I mean, he's omniscient. He knows everything. So what are you going to do? Inform him? No. God is after a relationship with the heart. That is what he wants to connect with. That's what he wants to change. And so for that reason, developing the right heart is ultimately even more important than developing the wisdom. So we're going to go ahead and jump into How does wisdom actually operate within the heart? Well, the first thing is that God places this portal into it that he can access. It's kind of like a thing that he can tap into, and he has the passcode to enter your heart at any time that he wants, and to place wisdom there. And we call this receiving revelation. God will use this ability to communicate directly to the heart. He can remove the shroud of mystery there and just give you the wisdom directly. He can also place the shroud of wisdom or the shroud of mystery over your own wisdom and block you from seeing it. Once you're a Christian, that you have this indwelling of the Holy Spirit, this is one of the spiritual gifts, is wisdom. And he'll primarily communicate with the Holy Spirit residing in you to give you wisdom as it's necessary. But one of the things that it does, what is the function? Well, it's this internal educator. It transforms the thought. If you rely on your own wisdom, this can only produce folly. Wisdom will not inform a heart that's not humble. God will withhold it. He wants a heart that is receptive to him. And what he'll do is he'll actually begin to reshape how the heart perceives reality. And this only happens once you surrender your heart and say, yes, God, I want to do it your way. I want your wisdom. I'm not going to rely on my mind. I'm going to recognize that my mind is there to assist my heart. But the real problem, the real thing that's going to have to change is the heart itself. So once God has tapped in, he's typed in the passcode, he begins to teach the heart discernment. And it's the ability to locate moral truth that's not apparent on the surface. You'll be able to search things out, and the heart will then start to become sensitive to God's justice, and will want the things that he wants and not want the things that he doesn't want. In fact, there's an absolutely beautiful passage when Solomon, he wasn't in the kingly line. He wasn't supposed to be the king, and a series of tragic events led it to where David's descendants had been killed. And here's little old Solomon, 15 years old, and they say, all right, you're about to be king. And he knows he's overwhelmed. He's like, I'm not ready for this. I don't know how to do anything. What are you talking about? And God says, well, I understand that. I'll give you whatever you want. And so what Solomon asks for is he asks for a lev shomer. This means a heart that can hear, because the thought behind Solomon is that if I have a heart that can hear God, then I will get his wisdom, and I won't necessarily need to know everything. He'll be able to talk to me in these moments. And God is so impressed with his answer that, as the story goes, Solomon received more wisdom than any human who at that point had ever lived, just basically an immeasurable amount. And Solomon, because of that, is this extraordinarily wise man who wrote multiple books of the Bible, and including the Mishlei, the Proverbs that we teach from every day. But the other way that wisdom speaks is it begins to align everything. It takes these things from mere information and then sort of coalesces them into something that's actionable. It's things that can be applied. Wisdom is going to demonstrate what's true. It's going to show the benefits of acting on it. It will integrate each of the areas of life. It will integrate your thoughts, which are your mental processes. It will integrate your inclinations, which are your desires and motives. And it will integrate your behavior, which is your will, your action, and your resolve. So with all these three things kind of in alignment, loving God, pursuing God, wanting God, this is how the heart can then move to its primary function, which is to direct the spirit. And once this heart is able to direct the spirit, it aligns everything to this wholeness of purpose. And wisdom, at the end of the day, is there to make the heart a better internal governor and connect God through the heart to the spirit. And one of the final things that as wisdom is being developed and is reaching this full maturity, it becomes this fountain that pours out of the wise man. And it isn't truly wisdom until others benefit from it. And this is going to really tie into this Hebrew concept of tzedakah. It's how one becomes a tzaddik. is that he has all this tremendous wisdom, and he starts to pour it out and serve others with it. And the whole concept here is that the wisdom itself is what belongs to God, and he allows it to temporarily reside inside the human heart. And once he begins to fill it, it saturates everything. It seeps into every pore, and then it can't help but pour outward. And that's where others can drink from this fountain of wisdom of these Siddiq and Hoham that God raises up for himself. And then this is going to take wisdom from these internal personal thoughts and then begin to sort of direct it over into relationship with others. And ultimately, wisdom is not something that the heart contains. It's something that the heart becomes. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our first term that composes this constellation of wisdom, and that is this idea of Sekel. It gets translated as intellect or intelligence. There are 5 proverbs that it's referenced in the Mishle, but I kind of liken this to this is the engine of the car. It's the pure raw intelligence that your brain has. It's the horsepower of this engine. Or if you look at how computers are categorized, it will determine, well, how many cores are in the processors? How much RAM does this computer have? So Sekel is not something that can be developed. It's assigned at birth. We would probably call this in our modern era IQ. And Sekel is going to determine the speed that someone learns at, and how easy or difficult new concepts are for them to understand. So, someone who's particularly bright, they've got a lot of intelligence. They're probably going to end up in the gifted and talented program. They're going to take the honors level classes. I think of Doogie Howser, that kind of person that they're going to rapidly proceed through life if they have a high level of Sekel, of intellect. And the interesting thing is that God gives everybody different levels of Sekel, but everybody, even the lowest, they still have an adequate amount of Sekel to navigate life. And as we look at this idea that this intelligence is on a spectrum that goes from low to medium to high, depending on where you are, you're going to have unique challenges. But the thing with intellect, with Sekel, is everybody's going to have challenges. You just need to know what yours are actually going to be. And it's not that one is necessarily easier than the other, just the things that you are going to have to overcome to acquire wisdom are going to be different. So we will start at the low end of the spectrum. This is the person with the low Sekel. Maybe they're not the sharpest tool in the shed, as the saying goes. They're going to have a difficult life path. Things are not going to come easy to them. They're going to have to study harder. They're going to have to work harder. It's going to be an uphill battle for them. But in the strangest way, the person with low intelligence, as long as they're honest with themselves, they're not going to operate under any sort of self-delusion. They're going to recognize who they are. And because of this, pride and humility is probably not something that they're going to have a tremendous battle with. And kind of thinking of pop culture of who would be the idea of somebody who had low Sekel but still ended up becoming a wise man anyway. And I immediately thought of a movie from the 90s that was so popular, and it's a movie called Forrest Gump. And so Forrest, he's, as the story goes, he understands I'm not a smart man, and yet as he sits on his little bus bench, everybody he talks to, he just illuminates with all this incredible insight and wisdom, and he gives the most amazing advice, and he's got all this, wide range of experiences, and, here's this little simple man who probably couldn't solve a basic math problem, but, he's got wisdom. And the person with low Sekel, the main things that are going to be their challenge is just you're going to have to work hard, and developing a drive is going to be the primary obstacle. If you know that you're on this end of the spectrum, that you're just going to have to apply more effort, and because of this, you're going to have to develop more endurance than the other person. It's going to be so much easier for you to quit and give up and just say it's not worth it. The other thing is that you look at prisons. They're full of people who test very low on the IQ scale, and because of this, they kind of struggle with the idea of long-term consequences for their behavior. And so sometimes person who has low Sekel, they can be more tempted to take a shortcut, that it's not worth putting in the effort, to go and get the good job. I'll just go deal drugs, things like that. I'll just go and steal this thing instead of working for it. So that's the moral challenge to the person with the low Sekel, is that they're going to have to temper this idea that, yes, you can do things. You're just going to have to work really hard to get it. On the other end of the spectrum is the person with the high Sekel. And, our first thought, our first inclination is like, well, then that's the guy who's got the easiest path, right? He's smart and he can figure everything out. And for life, yes, probably he's going to have an easier path. He's going to figure out things very rapidly. He'll probably be capable of, higher levels of attainment and achievement. He'll have a good job. He'll make a lot of money. He'll, cream rise to the top kind of deal. But this person is going to have a very difficult spiritual path, because you can become very lazy at just how fast things will come to you. And that this person with this high Sekel, over time, what they will do is they'll learn to rely on their own wits, and they'll become very self-dependent. And what happens is, when you can figure things out on your own, well, you start to use that skill in other things, chiefly morality. And so this man with the high Sekel, he'll start to construct his own moral universe. He'll start to tear down the idea of religion in general, and he'll form this whole worldview. And because he's attaining and achieving stuff, it's going to be very difficult for him to develop humility. And you start talking to him about dependency on God, like, he's going to laugh at you. And without moral tethering, this person with this high IQ, they're capable of tremendous evil. And so sort of how we looked at the idea of like a Forrest Gump, who's overcoming his low Sekel to become, a wise man. When I was thinking about this, of like, who's a I don't know, figure from pop culture that failed at this test. And I remember enjoying the TV show Breaking Bad. It's about the high school chemistry teacher who just up and decides he's going to use all of his skill in chemistry to start making crystal meth. And he makes these little small decisions along the way, and by the end of it, the guy's just an absolute monster. And he's very, very proud, and he's depending on his intelligence to outsmart the police, to outsmart the drug kingpins, to outsmart the other drug dealers, to outsmart his wife. And he's just bringing everybody in his family down, because he rationalizes everything. And this is the real challenge for the person with the high Sekel, is that they're going to probably have an over-reliance on their own wisdom. They're not going to see it as the tool. They're going to see it as the primary thing. They'll also probably rationalize sin. You're going to have a very difficult time convincing them that what they're doing is wrong. And they'll spend a lot of time in their brain, which means they will detach their heart and their inner self. And this person's going to struggle mightily with having a relationship with God. And so that will bring us to, well, who are the people in between? Well, that's virtually every person on earth. Is we're not going to be Forrest Gump, and we're not going to be Walter White. We are somewhere right in the middle. And this might actually end up being the worst combination of all, because we're going to get the worst of both worlds. The people in the middle, they will struggle mightily with self-deception. They are going to think that they're the high IQ person. They're going to think that they're Walter White. And they'll have the same exact pitfalls. They'll still be prone to self-reliance, to pride, and everything else, but they will not have the same amount of talent. They can't actually back it up. And they'll also think that by being that smart, they don't have to work as hard. And they find out, no, you're very self-deluded if you think either of those things. The other thing that the people in the middle, the medium Sekel, self-deception is that he will probably think he's a good person. He will see himself as moral. He will think that he's Forrest Gump, not harming a fly, just sitting on his little bus bench, eating chocolates and being nice and talking to everybody kind enough to sit down with him. So he's going to underestimate his own evil. He's going to underestimate the amount of work he has to do. And he's going to probably be challenged and fail at both realms of life. Spirit and life are both going to be challenging. So he's going to really, really, really have to battle humility, pride, laziness, integrating his heart to love God. He's going to struggle with moral relativism, but this is, in effect, this is every one of us is going to have to fight that battle. And each level of intelligence will fall in its own strength, and they will fail for each of their own reasons. And so no matter who you are or what your intelligence level is, this is a vulnerability in life for you. So it's for this reason that Sekel is always the enemy, and wisdom is the friend. But wisdom must be developed and acquired. In fact, he says, go get wisdom, acquire it. It is not self-generated. And the other thing with wisdom is it has to be morally tempered. And since most of us are going to fail here, this means that there's got to be a path that lets the failure not fail. And of course, we would understand that as a Savior who redeems us from our sin. That is Yeshua, Jesus Christ. And that is the main point, is that we will seek him, but in the meantime we seek his righteousness here on earth while he teaches us everything else. So I think that this is probably a good spot to stop. This is getting a little long. We've still got 9 more elements that compose this constellation of wisdom to get to. This will end up being an incredibly long video if I don't go ahead and cut it off here. But there are 3 of these inputs that are going to be developed internally. There are 3 that are going to be developed externally. And this interplay of these are going to create 4 traits that then will also feed into the wisdom. So these are the 10 things that a wise man will come to develop over time. And this is where the importance of the Mishle, the Mashal is, because you're going to have to learn how to govern these, as the whole purpose of the Mishle, the Mashal, were so that these descendants of Solomon could be good leaders and that they could govern an entire nation. But the first thing you are going to learn to govern is yourself and your Sekel. So thank you for your time. Shalom.